Okay, well, welcome, good afternoon. Hope that you all are enjoying the lovely Houston weather and your time here at Flight Sim Expo so far. Welcome to those that are joining us via the live stream as well. So for those in the room, real quick show of hands, how many came here on a commercial air carrier? Delta, United, okay, most of you did, yeah, me too. I've always noted that the major airlines can always tell when Flight Sim Expo is coming to town. Want to know how? It's because the seats behind the window seats behind the wings are the first ones sold out on every single flight in and out of the city all weekend long. A few of you understand that. My wife does not understand that. She's like, honey, really, again? I'm like, babe, I'm sorry, but I need to know at any given time what configuration the pilots have the aircraft in. Because if anything happens, I need to be ready. So, speaking of being ready, we're going to get you ready today to be able to take your next steps in your flight sim career. What do I mean by next steps? I'm talking about going from where you're flying in an empty sky, or a sky that's populated only by computer-generated pilots and controllers, to where you're comfortable flying in a virtual world populated by thousands of real, live, breathing people acting as virtual pilots and virtual controllers. Does that sound exciting? Does that sound intimidating? A little of both? Okay, I'm here to help. So, who am I? Stated a different way. Why should you listen to me? It's a fair question. I mean, look at me. I've been doing this flight sim thing for about 4 decades. Now, that being said, I have no real-world PIC time, 0.0 hours in the logbook. So listen, but take me with a grain of salt. I'm a member of the VATSIM community. I've been flying on the network since 2010, about 2,800 pilot hours. More than some, not as many as others. I've been a controller on the network for 8 years, active really for the last 5. If you are familiar with VATSTAR, those of you who are part of VATSIM, you might know about VATSTAR, a virtual pilot training organization for VATSIM, and I wrote all of their training and testing material when they opened. Ran the training department there for the first 3 years they were up and running. Now, I am not a real pilot, but I play one on Twitch TV. In fact, a week from today, the Twitch live stream celebrates its 5th anniversary. Thank you. Oh, how sweet. Thank you, guys. Side note, show of hands. How many are aware of the origin of the joke, I'm not a blank, but I play one on TV? Okay, if your hand is up, you are overdue for your colonoscopy. I hope you've had one. If not, don't worry. Enjoy your youth while it lasts. Okay.
So what is the real Where it's coming from?
Where's what's coming from? Old TV commercial. Old soap star did a TV commercial. I'm not a real doctor, but I play one on TV. We do have a lot to cover today, guys. I'm going to ask that you hold your questions to the end. I'm going to close the presentation with a bunch of contact information that any of you on the live stream can use to get in touch with me. You'll find that I'm very receptive, I'm very open to, and committed to helping new people get started in this hobby, so please feel free to get in touch. But for those of you in the room, like I said to a few of you before we got started, the 4 o'clock session got canceled, so I will be happy to stay and do as much Q&A as you guys are willing to listen to me talk. What we are going to cover today, choosing an appropriate call sign for what you're doing, how to find or create a realistic route, some basics on communication with air traffic controllers. We're going to talk about some of the more common rookie mistakes and how to avoid them. And we'll talk about being ready to deal with the unexpected. Now, what we won't cover today are things like how to choose and sign up for an online flight sim network. We will not cover how to download and install that network's pilot connection software, pilot client, or whatever they might call it. We will not cover how to file a flight plan on that network. Why will I not cover those things? Because there are lots of different networks to choose from. These are only the 3 most popular. But there's plenty to choose from, and I'm not here to steer you toward any specific one. I did mention I'm a member of VATSIM, so some of the examples that I cover will be pertinent specifically to VATSIM. Most of what I talk about will be applicable to any realistic online flight simulation network. And whatever network you choose, they should have a startup guide that will cover those 3 points up there. All right, so let's first talk about choosing a call sign that's appropriate for your mission type. And I should clarify by saying, on most networks, at least all the ones that I'm familiar with, you don't need to use the same call sign every time you connect. You have a user ID, network ID, whatever. But when you connect to the network each time, you might be in a different type of airplane. You're not going to fly the same type of aircraft every time unless you want to. But you might also be able to give yourself a call sign that's appropriate for the type of operation that you're doing that day. And the 3 main types of call signs are air carrier call signs. Go Maryland. Private call signs, AKA general aviation call signs, and military call signs. So first we'll cover air carrier call signs. There's some specific do's and don'ts. You do want to use the 3-letter ICAO identifier for your airline. So for example, if you're flying Southwest, you want to use SWA, not WN. The 2-letter one is what's on your passenger ticket. The 3-letter one is what is shown on the air traffic control scope. So that's what you want to appear as on the network. After that comes a number, anywhere from 1 to 4 digits. In the US, that's real easy because that actually is what's on the passenger ticket. That is the same as the flight number. In Europe now, they have recently made a move to reduce the number of similar sounding call signs that are in any specific area, and they've assigned kind of a randomized alphanumeric identifier to each flight that's different from the passenger flight number. So the last 1 or 2 digits on a European air carrier flight might be letters rather than numbers. So in this example, we got Ryanair 5131. He's FR 5131 on the passenger tickets, but he's RYR 907 Echo Kilo for ATC purposes. Key point is to be aware of the difference between the call sign that you log in with and the call sign that you say. In many cases, the airline's call sign is just its name. American, Delta, Southwest, United, all the American ones are boring. Ryanair is just Ryanair for that matter. But a lot of times you have something that's a little bit more unique or historic or tied into the history of the airline. Clipper, in the case of Pan Am, Speedbird for British Airways, Cactus, Citrus, some other ones. A lot of the regional air carriers in the US have some really fun ones. A couple of important don'ts to keep in mind. Please don't use the 2-letter code like I mentioned before. So if you're Delta, you want to log on as DAL, not DL. And by all means, please do not spell out the word Delta and your flight number. Let's move on to general aviation call signs. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be using the aircraft's registration number. It's also called its tail number for obvious reasons, and the number's right there on the tail. In the US, they're called N numbers. Outside, you'll see sometimes 2 letters and a hyphen and 3 more letters, or 1 letter and a hyphen and 4 more letters. Other countries, it's a mix of letters and numbers. If you think of it in terms of US license plates, each state has its own kind of different format for what order the letters and numbers come in, and it's kind of the same thing in general aviation call signs around the world. Every country kind of has its own specific format for their aircraft registration. On the flip side, though, there are some filing services. Whoops, I'm 1 behind, okay. There we go. There's some filing services. The 2 most common ones that I'm aware of are 4Flight and flightplan.com that are used for general aviation flights that want to file and kind of mask the N number so that you guys can't track Elon Musk around the world. And you get a call sign that's basically for 4Flight, it's FFL and a number, or .com. For flightplan.com, you get DCM for .com and a flight number. So those are going to revert back to the air carrier call signs that we were talking about on the previous slide, and perfectly appropriate to use those on for a general aviation flight as well. One thing that you don't want to do is put the name of the make or model of your aircraft and a number. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about, the difference between what you log on as and the difference and what you say. So when I'm flying Mooney Ovation, I'm going to be connected as N514DV, but on the radio, I'm going to identify as Mooney 514 Delta Victor. But I'm not going to write out Mooney and my number. That's just a convention of, again, it's the difference between what you say versus what your visual call sign is. Let's briefly touch on military call signs. Two main formats that those come in. One's a tactical call sign. It's based on the squadron name. It's up to 5 letters. Sometimes you have to shorten them down to 5 letters, and then you throw 1 or 2 digits after that. There's some really fun ones out there. Devil, Spectre, Hammer. I think on that list is Ramrod somewhere. You can use a real one. You can make one up. Again, I'm speaking VATSIM rules. I'm assuming they're similar on other networks. Then there's the service-based call signs, which are very similar to air carrier call signs, except that the identifier is just 1 or 2 letters in most cases. There's a list of ones that the US uses, and you can search around. You can find ones that are used outside the US. Some of the ones outside the US do use a 3-letter ICAO identifier. So again, same format we talked about 2 slides ago. Again, some don'ts, some things to avoid. Don't connect with the pilot's nickname. We don't need to see Maverick or Merlin or Hollywood on the scope. That's what they might talk to each other on the military communication channels, but on civilian air traffic control frequencies, they would be Ghost Rider 2-1 or what have you. And then Air Force One is an interesting case. What can I say about Air Force One? Okay. Well, first of all, Air Force One, you'll notice that if you go by what I said like 10 seconds ago, it should be A1. AF1 is correct. It's just kind of an unusual exception. But if you do choose to use Air Force One on the VATSIM network, it is AF1 properly. One thing to note, and again, speaking on VATSIM, you don't get priority handling if you're Air Force One, because in the real world, obviously, it is the actual President of the United States. On VATSIM, it's any Joe Schmo who decides he's Air Force One that day. So you don't get the controllers to move people out of the way, close airspace, close airports for you. Doesn't work that way. Sorry. And then the other word of caution I'll say is that a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times people who choose to log on as Air Force One are, shall we say, attention seekers who are about to show off how cool they are when all 4 engines explode and they're going to save the life of the president and everyone on board. The VATSIM controllers have seen that a few times. Believe me, you're not as cool as you think you are. You're mostly just being a distraction. So that's my caveat there. Let's move on to the next topic. We'll talk about finding or creating a realistic route. We'll start with some sources for IFR airliner-style flights. That is the preponderance of what you see on the VATSIM network, at least. But we will cover general aviation as well. My first go-to for realistic airline routes is FlightAware. They have a tool that is called the IFR Route Analyzer that I love. Did that video start? It did not. There it goes. Okay. So you go to the link for that, and you would simply type in your origin and your destination. Today we're going to go Los Angeles to Denver. At the top, you get all the different routes that have been flown from Los Angeles to Denver in the last week and a count of the number of times each one was used. At the bottom, you actually have every individual flight that went from Los Angeles to Denver, and you can click on any one of them, open up, get more information, get the gate assignments. I love using that for gate assignments. Otherwise, I have no idea where United parks at Los Angeles. Not that it matters, but it's nice to know. But that's my number one route, number one source, rather. Second one is SimBrief by Navigraph, of course, one of the diamond sponsors of the event this weekend, by the way. This site you do need a login for, but it is free to create one, or if you already have Navigraph for data management, you already have a login. You use the very same one here. We're going to go to the center option that is called Create a Flight Plan. Right there. We're going to put in the same LAX to Denver. We're going to choose a aircraft type, 737-700 in this case. And it's going to pull up, if you scroll down, you'll see a suggested route and some alternates. And if you have been paying attention and you have really excellent vision, you will note that they are the same ones that FlightAware gave us a moment ago. Third great resource is SkyVector. It allows you to plot out a route, make adjustments, drag and drop in new waypoints, kind of just fiddle with it however you like. We're just going to paste in the route that we just got from SimBrief or FlightAware here. But then if we hover over the airport names in the flight plan box there, we'll get this little drop down and a bunch of little PDF icons. We can right click, open those in a new tab, and you can pull up all of the procedural charts that we need for this flight for Los Angeles to Denver. And the importance of pulling up those charts and having those charts handy is something that we're going to cover in a couple of slides from now. If you're flying general aviation, by the way, while all that's going on, let's talk about this. Flying general aviation, this is also my go-to resource because I'll just plot origin destination straight line, and then I'll open up all the SIDs from the origin, all the stars from the destination, look to see if there's any pertinent to the aircraft type and direction, and kind of build my route piece by piece that way. Even if you're doing VFR flight, FlightAware, SkyVector, great resource for that because you can start with a direct path between your origin and your destination, and then you can literally drag the route over to a lake or a tower or a highway, whatever you're going to follow, and it'll just put that point there to give you the GPS coordinates, not that you need them because you're going to be identifying it visually, not by GPS. But that's a great way to build a VFR route, and then that's your plan. You can kind of use the mileage from that to plan your fuel and so forth. But anyway, so SkyVector, great tool, whether you're GA or IFR or VFR or what have you. But again, it's my go-to resource for pulling up all the charts that you need to have handy for your route that you're about to do. Because the key don't is don't blindly accept the route without looking at the relevant charts. You'll notice this is already the second time I've said it. I'm probably going to say it a few more times. But the other reason you want to look at all the charts is because they're not all pertinent to all aircraft types. So, for example, we got one that it says for turbojet aircraft only. So if you're a King Air or a twin, you don't want to be filing that particular procedure. All right, let's start with the basics on interacting with air traffic controllers, probably one of the more intimidating part of making that first flight on an online network as opposed to being on your own. We're going to cover the basics of letters and numbers, check-in, or what you say when you check in initially. We're going to talk about that pesky clearance, that whole mouthful that you got to be ready to copy all at once. No, you don't. I'll tell you how to avoid that. How to read back an instruction, how to acknowledge an instruction properly, and then one of my personal tips for when you're asked to report something in sight. So on this slide, I was going to talk letters and numbers, talk about the NATO alphabet, talk about how we say niner instead of nine. In the interest of time, is there anybody in the room that is not really familiar with this? Everyone kind of knows. Okay, you don't. Okay. Okay. The short version is a bunch of letters rhyme with each other. B, C, D, E, G, T, P, V, Z. Okay, very easy to mishear for each other. So we use the substitution table so that it's more distinct. It's harder to confuse one for another. Numbers 5 and 9, when you got background noise, can sound similar, so we say niner instead of nine. Now some people will tell you it's because you don't want to say nine like in German. It can be mistaken for no, which is probably part of the story also. Maybe that's why they put niner instead of fiver. But really, to me, it's like, I think it's to make it distinct as a digit from the number 5. But anyway, we'll move on. When you check in with first check in with a new controller, there's a pretty standard order that you use. And you use pretty much the same order every time, but there's certain instances where you don't have to say every piece of what's here. So we'll go over that. We always start by saying their call sign, the call sign of the ATC station you're addressing. Your call sign, which we chose properly a few slides ago. Your location, which they say your position. Controller ever says 514 Delta Victor, say position, they're not asking me to say I'm seated, leaning back slightly. They're going to want you to check in with their call sign, your location, your altitude, and if you're climbing or descending, they want the altitude you're climbing or descending to. Your intentions, what are you doing, where are you going? And the ATIS letter. Everybody know what ATIS is? Yes, no? Anybody not know what ATIS is? Okay. A couple of newer folks here. Okay, got it. No problem, we'll cover it. ATIS is basically, it's a recording that runs on a loop specific to an airport. So when you're entering their airspace or when you're about to take off, you listen to the recording. It gives you the weather observation, which runways or approaches are in use, any other operational information at the airport. And at the end, it says, advise on initial contact, you have information blank. They assign a letter to it. Every time they update it, they increment the letter by 1. Okay? So pilots will often say, okay, we've got information Juliet, or we got Juliet on board.
I just want to mention for the new people that it's on a separate frequency.
Yeah, yep, it is. It is on a separate frequency, so you would listen, you switch to that frequency, you listen to the recording, and then you switch back to contact your controller. So yeah, we got Juliet on board. And like I was saying, you don't have to say all of this every time you check in with a new controller. Sometimes these things are implied. Sometimes these things are not applicable or what have you. Let's go over a couple examples. Well, all right, let's skip on. The first example that we're going to make is an initial call for clearance. So we'll say, Eastern Ground, Mooney 514 Delta Victor, IFR to Teterboro, Juliet on board. So note we start with their call sign, Eastern Ground, then our call sign. We can skip location because obviously we're talking to Eastern Ground. We're on the ground at Eastern, we know that. Altitude, not applicable, we're on the ground. Now outside the US, sometimes it is standard to check in with parking location when you call for an initial IFR clearance. Usually in the US, your delivery controller does not care where you're parked. So these things do have some regional variations. Usually not deal-breaking ones. One other caveat, though, actually, is sometimes you're at a non-towered field or a field that is not staffed at that time, and you're actually going to make your initial IFR clearance call to a controller like an approach controller or a center controller whose airspace overlies that. In that case, it is good to give your location. I'm on the ground at Easton. That way it gives them some idea where they need to be looking for you on their scope. And then finally, when you do call Eastern Ground for taxi, it is customary to let them know where on the field you're parked. A virtual controller can usually see that. If you're doing your communications realistically and you're pretending the guy's literally up there in the cab looking around the field for you, you want to give them some idea where you're parked when you go to taxi. All right. Yeah, so there you go. You don't have to say location, you don't have to say altitude. Would have been helpful if I hit that button a few minutes ago. Example 2. We're heading up toward Teterboro. We're headed from Philly approach to New York approach. So New York approach, Mooney 514 Delta Victor 7000, information Yankee. So we were already radar identified. We don't need to give our location. Once you hear the words radar contact, you're passed from one controller to another. They already know where you are. You can omit that. We do give the altitude pretty much every time. And I say pretty much, there are cases if you're handed from one Philly approach controller to another Philly approach controller, I think technically you don't have to. Technically don't have to, but if you are just in the habit of giving your altitude every time, probably not a bad thing. But certainly once you're handed from Philly approach to New York approach, you should verify your altitude. We are on an IFR flight plan. So that means they kind of know what our intentions are. We're going to Teterboro. It's in our plan. That's right in front of them. And we have information Yankee, so we do say that. All right, another one. Let's do one where we're VFR. We're VFRing along in Class Echo airspace. We're not under flight following. We're not talking to anybody because we don't have to be. But we're just about to land at Atlantic City, which is a Class Charlie airspace, so we need to talk to that controller before we enter that Charlie. Atlantic City approach, Mooney 514 Delta Victor, 20 miles west of the field, 7,500 descending VFR, full stop Atlantic City, we got Charlie. So yeah, in that case, you got to give them every darn one of those. It is a mouthful. Final example, we're going to go IFR, We're handed from our departure controller to our center controller. Washington Center, Southwest 123, 15,000, 17,000. Very easy. Okay? We're already radar identified because our departure controller did that. We're on an IFR flight plan. They know that we're headed to Chicago, wherever we're going. We give our altitude, and there's no ATIS information in center's airspace because that's, like I said, it's tied to an airport. So really all it's left with is call sign, altitude, altitude. Very easy. Now that initial check-in can sound intimidating because it's a lot that you have to say. Copying your clearance tends to be intimidating because you think it's a lot that you have to copy down all at once. You don't have to copy it down all at once. Here's the trick. First of all, it comes in a standard order. Does anybody know the mnemonic that we use? By the way, this is the FAA format. Craft, thank you guys. Yeah, clearance, route, altitude, frequency, and transponder. It does vary a little bit from this in other parts of the world. It's not too much, but it's similar. But yeah, craft does seem like a lot to copy at once. But you got a trick. You usually know what these things are going to be before you even call up. Okay, what's clearance limit? What's clearance limit usually going to be? Where are you going? You already know that, I hope. The route is what? What you filed. Now, there are going to be cases where they reroute you. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but most of the time it's going to be what you filed. So you should know what they're about to say there for the most part. Altitude comes in two stages. You got an initial altitude, and then you're going to be told when to expect your cruise altitude. How do you know, or how can you guess your initial altitude? Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it is on the SID chart. Not always. Sometimes that's just the first thing you're going to have to copy down cold. Or what they told the guy before you, yeah. If he's the same aircraft type. If he's the same aircraft type. Because if you're Cessna 172 and your initial's 10,000, yeah. So, but yeah, you can take a guess usually from what was on the SID chart. Sometimes it's covered there, sometimes it's not. If it's not, I'm sorry, this is the first one you're going to have to copy down cold. I apologize. Frequency, that's another one that might be on the charts, right? Depending on which network you're on, you can or cannot rely on that. Pilot Edge, for one, does tend to simulate all frequencies at all times. That sim is a little different. When only some controllers are online, they inherit the duties of the positions below them. So sometimes you can kind of infer what your departure frequency is going to be because, hey, I'm leaving Boston, and I only see Boston Tower and Boston Center. It's not going to be Tower, so I guess it's the guy on Center. So you can make some educated guesses there. But again, you might just have to copy that one down cold. And then the transponder, obviously, you're going to have to copy that one down cold, but it's only a 4-digit number. Hopefully you guys can handle that. Okay. So again, write it all out ahead of time. Then you can focus on just what the unexpected changes were in your clearance. A couple of real quick topics to conclude air traffic control interaction. Readbacks, basically any instruction that you're given, you want to read back to make sure you heard correctly. You don't need to read back informational things like wind direction or other informational things. You're 5 miles on trail of a King Air. You're 3 miles from the final approach fix. You don't need to read those back. It's not an instruction. Altimeter settings, I've heard different opinions on that. I tend to read those back. Technically, it's just weather information, but it's kind of an instruction to set your altimeter to that. So anyway, some people do, some people don't. We're not going to debate that today. But certainly if it's a heading, an altitude, or a speed, you certainly want to read those things back. With headings and altitudes, a lot of times just the numbers is sufficient. If you hear Mooney 514 Delta Victor, turn left heading 360, descend and maintain 3,000. 360, 3,000, 514 Delta Victor. That's all I got to say. On that note, do please ensure your call sign is the last thing you say. It doesn't have to be the last thing necessarily, but you do need to include the call sign just to make sure that the controller knows that the person he thought he gave that instruction to is the one who is actually responding to it. When you're asked to report something in sight, it's an interesting one. Anyone know what the two official, actual sanctioned responses are. If you're to say, turn left heading 360, report the field in sight.
Have it inside.
I have it in sight, that's the easy one. If I don't have it in sight, what am I supposed to say? Negative contact. I don't like that one. It's not officially approved phraseology, but I like to say looking, because number one, it's shorter, okay? Number two, negative contact has this connotation like, looked, didn't see it, sorry. Yep, it's not, I didn't see it, whatever, sorry. So at least if you're looking for the field, the controller has some idea that you're going to report back when you do see it. The other thing I don't like to do is when they say, or I don't like to read back the instruction, I will report the field in sight. Let's do this as an example. So approach will say, Mooney 5 and 4 Delta Victor, turn left heading 350 on the rollout, field will be at your 11 o'clock, 8 miles, report in sight. And I say, left to 350, we'll report the field in sight, 5 and 4 Delta Victor. Approach then says, 5 and 4 Delta Victor, roger, thanks, cleared visual approach, runway 33 right. What just happened? Anybody catch it? The last thing he heard you say was field in sight, and then he cleared you on the visual approach. Okay? I'm going to tell you a little secret, having done this VATSIM stuff from the controller side. When I issue your command, I am not waiting there intently for you to read it back. Did he get it right? Did he get it wrong? No. I'm already looking at the next plane. Who's next? Who do I need? My ATC instructor over there. He beat this into my head. Don't wait. Start looking. Who's the next guy that needs an instruction now? So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm half listening to you. If what you said sounds correct and confident, I'm pretty much going to assume you got it right. But the last thing you say is field in sight. Oh, great, I can give him the visual approach. Mooney 5 and 4 Delta Victor, roger, thanks, cleared visual approach, runway 33 right. So what I prefer to say is, if the approach controller says, 5 and 4 Delta Victor, turn left heading 350 on the rollout, field will be at your 11 o'clock, 8 miles, report in sight. Left 350, looking for the field, 5 and 4 Delta Victor. Right? Okay.
Sorry, you were saying all of these things so rapidly, I would have a heck of a time understanding in the circumstances, not with radio noise. Is that really how fast that is?
No, I'm sweating my butt off. And I was told to limit this to 45 minutes. So, now, I tell you what, there are some VATSIM and real traffic controllers that will try and talk that fast, especially when the airspace gets busy. When that happens, a lot of times they're shooting themselves in the foot, because the faster they talk, the more pilots need them to read back and repeat. Inexperience does that. Remember, most of us on these networks are just doing this for fun. We're not trained. We're under pressure. And Michael. Yep. It's different per the controller. Some controllers are just like, spit it out, just give it to me. Others are like, wait a minute, I need to copy all this stuff down. It really, you kind of have to feel them out. Some do, some don't. The question, by the way, was, when you're calling up, especially when you're VFR, you're calling up for flight following, there's a ton of information you have to give them all at once. It's turning the tables on that clearance thing, right? So I get to be the guy who gets to spit out a paragraph full of stuff that you have to write down all of a sudden. So sometimes what you do, Washington Center, Mooney 5 and 4 Delta Victor VFR request. That just lets them know, oh, I better grab my pen. But some controllers like that, and some controllers are just like, just go, I'm ready, I know what I'm doing. So it depends on the controller. Anyway, where do we go? We're going to talk about some rookie mistakes that we want to avoid here. What we're about to cover, by the way, I want to tread this carefully here, because these are mistakes that are not made by idiots, and I want to stress that. They're being made by sim pilots who might even have hundreds or thousands of flights under their belts. But they've made those flights in a virtual world where there's nobody else around, or there's only AI-generated traffic around. If they make a mistake along the lines of what I'm about to show, the virtual controller might not call them out on it. They might not know it's wrong. They might have any idea that they did something that was really egregious. And then the first time they do it on VATSIM, the controller's like, excuse me, why are you taxiing onto a runway right now? Because I didn't know I wasn't allowed to do that. It can be kind of humbling, right? It can kind of be a little off-putting. You know, you feel like you've been doing this. Wow, God, I've done 1,000 flights in this aircraft. Why is this controller making me sound like I'm an idiot right now? It's a learning curve, man. It's stuff that you trained yourself to do wrong because nobody told you it was wrong. So it just happens sometimes. It's part of the learning environment. Shake it off. We're going to help you avoid some of the common ones here in just a moment. First of all, common mistake I see among beginning online pilots: choosing too busy of an area before you're really comfortable. We'll talk about why that happens. Entering a runway before you are cleared to, we'll talk about that. Thinking that you're ready to perform a flight without looking at the charts. Boy, that's the third time I've said that. We'll talk about some common mistakes with SIDs, standard instrument departures. We'll talk about altitude and lateral compliance on those. And we'll talk about some critical issues with STARS, which are your standard terminal arrival routes, and some, both altitude and lateral compliance with those. Okay. This one's going to seem like common sense. I do not mean to insult anyone in the room, but you will be surprised how often I see people go wrong here. So I figured it's worth mentioning. On the left side of the screen is a screenshot of VATSIM activity during an event at Winnipeg. You see multiple streams of traffic coming in from all directions, and what we call, in colloquial terms, a Charlie Foxtrot there in the middle of the screen. On the right, Memphis Center on a Tuesday. Not every Tuesday is like that, but on this particular Tuesday, that's what Memphis Center looked like on VATSIM. Again, by the way, the app that you're looking at here is called VATSpy. Map.vatsim.net's another tool, Volanta, a little nav map. There's a bunch you can use to see who's on VATSIM at any given moment. And again, I'm not advocating specifically for VATSIM, but I assume that IVAO, Pilot Edge, whatever other network you're on, has something like this. You can see who's on and what's going on. So, at the risk of the obvious, which of these two scenarios does it seem like making a rookie mistake might be disruptive to the flow of traffic? Okay. I'm not going to verify that you chose correctly. I couldn't tell which one you were pointing at, but I'm going to assume that you are following along. Okay, good. On which of these might it seem like a controller might have time to slow down and repeat and explain things? Again, don't point, I know what you... I trust you guys are with me here, okay? I trust. Okay. There's a tendency for new members to get on and they get their account up and running and they go, oh, all that activity at Winnipeg today, that looks like it's going to be fun. If you aren't comfortable with what your expectations are, that is not going to be fun because you're going to be the guy to make one of these other rookie mistakes and the controller's going to be like, Southwest 123, why are you turning toward the airport right now? And you're going to feel like a fool. And it's not so bad when you're the only guy turning toward the airport, but when you're in a stream of 30 people turning toward the airport, it can be a little more humbling. So make those first handful of flights in the right-hand scenario, please. And I can tell you that we hear, as VATSIM controllers, we hear horror stories about people that are like, oh man, I just bumped a knob here. Did I mess up the audio? Okay. We hear horror stories about people that are like, oh man, I got on VATSIM and I made this little mistake, but the controller totally chewed me out and it just made me feel horrible, and I'm never going to try that again, man. I almost guarantee you, 99 times out of 100, that person just didn't make a good choice in this regard. Super critical to your learning experience on VATSIM. Dip your toe into the water. Don't dive into the deep end, okay? All right, second topic, runway incursions. Here we go. In a single-player environment, it is absolutely fine for you to line up straight onto a runway anytime you want without repercussions. The AI controller might even send somebody around But what they probably won't do is then come back to you and say, Southwest 123, what are you doing on my runway right now? Human online controller probably will do that. In our example today, today we're going to be American 123, because we're Washington Reagan, and there we are. Our instruction is American 123, Washington ground, runway 19er, taxi via Kilo, Sierra, Juliet, cross runway 15, taxi via Kilo. So, here we go. Way out of the alley, left on the Kilo. We're up to the whole short bars at runway 15. First question for the room, are we allowed to continue from this position right now? Yes. We are. That is correct. Because we did hear the words cross runway 15 at Kilo. It's okay to ask if you're not sure, but you may. Just go right on across. So, there we go. We continued. We made the right on Sierra, made the left on Juliet. We're now at the whole short bars of runway 19er. Second question for the room. Are we allowed then to continue onto runway 19er? No. Thank you. The correct answer is no, we may not. So we are going to wait back there at the whole short bars for runway 15. Absent any further instructions, this is as far as we can go. There are only 5 things that allow you to enter a runway from the ground. Anybody know what they are? Clear for takeoff is the obvious one, yep. Line up and wait is the second most obvious one. You guys are getting this right in the right order, too. What's the third one? We just talked about it, right. Fourth one? Taxi via. Taxi via runway 15 or taxi via runway 19er. What's the fifth one?
Back taxi.
Back taxi runway 15 or runway 19er. Very good, yep.
Do that on 15 sometimes.
Yeah, we do occasionally do that. If you don't hear one of those 5 things, you should not be on a runway. All right. Standard instrument departures. Let's first talk about altitudes. In your initial clearance, there is an initial altitude that you need to level off and you can't exceed until your departure controller says it's okay. That initial altitude, not your filed cruise, is what needs to go in that box right there, okay? Where does that altitude come from? We talked about it a little bit ago. It's the initial altitude in your clearance, which you copied down when there was craft and blah, 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 you remember. Matter of fact, there's a couple different ways it might come. It might come explicitly stated, maintain 4,000, expect flight level 350, 10 minutes after departure. It might be implicitly stated, climb via SID. What's that mean? Go by what's on the chart, right, exactly. Remember, because we're pretending that we're good pilots today. We had all those charts available and in front of us. And then the third one, you don't get it too much. Oh, by the way, here's climb via SID. If it's not stated, then it's going to be in your SID somewhere, right? If they don't say, if you get that craft, C-R-A-F-T, and they don't say anything for altitude, well, guess what? Right there on the SID, it says, maintain something thousand, and then expect file cruise 10 minutes after departure. So technically speaking, the delivery controller doesn't need to state it. They already stated it by clearing you on this SID, and you accepted that clearance. It's redundant. All right, still on SIDs, let's talk lateral compliance. Most resources will categorize SIDs as one of 3 things. Anybody know? So 3 types of SIDs. I know you know, shush.
Pilot nav, hybrid nav, and usually referred to as just vector.
Radar vector, yeah. So radar vector means the controller's literally going to tell you how to get to that first point on your filed route. Pilot nav means the SID tells you how to get to your filed route. Hybrid means it's a little of both, right? I'm going to simplify it. In terms of what you do off the runway, it's 2 choices. Either you're waiting for vectors or you're joining your route as programmed in your FMC or what have you. So yeah, whether it's vectored or hybrid, sort of lost my place here. Okay, so this is the Portland 6. It's radar vectored departure out of Portland. On this one, it is certainly fly runway heading. Oh, by the way, what heading do you fly when you're waiting for those vectors? Not always runway heading. Why? You gotta look at the chart. In this one, it is runway heading, so that's a trick question. So this is the Portland 6. You do fly runway heading and then wait for vectors easy enough. Okay. This is the Swan 3 out of Baltimore. What heading do we fly while we're waiting for vectors? Anybody? I don't know if you guys can see that. So it kind of depends on the runway in this case. You really do have to read this one. Because if you depart on runway 28, you straight out for 3 miles, and then you make a left to 150, and that's supposed to be on you to do that. The controller's not supposed to remind you. You accepted a clearance on the Swan 3, so you agreed to do that. So it is very imperative that you read these charts. The FMC, by the way, may or may not get that right. So you're going to have to just read that and make sure the airplane does what it's supposed to do. Another example, the National 8, radar vector departure from Washington National. I see you smiling. You know what's coming here. Don't get ahead of me. Okay, so what is the heading that we fly if we are in north flow departing runway 1? Anybody see it? Can you guys read that? That's a very curious instruction up there. Left turn as soon as practical. Why is that there? What's that? Yeah, I think it has something to do with that giant bold notice right there. Yeah, that's a very, very Homeland Security sensitive airspace there that you want to avoid, especially because of the alleged anti-aircraft missile batteries that are supposedly on there. On VATSIM, you don't have to worry about that so much. Although that would be fun, I guess, maybe. On VATSIM, the consequences are a little less severe. Anybody in the room watched my live stream when I control at DCA? Yeah, I know a few of you in the back room have, so yeah, you get the infamous bus count. That's the sad Rob over there. The good news is, though, if we keep a count on the live stream of how many people have flown through the prohibited airspace, what's it tell you? You're not the only one that's going to mess it up, so it's fine. Normally on VATSIM, if we have time, we'll just kindly say Southwest 123 for future reference. Prohibited airspace north of the field. So make sure you check that SIDS for that immediate left turn off the runway for next time. But in the meantime, have a great flight. Contact Washington Center 133.72 or what have you. So if we're busy, we might not even say that. You might not even know you messed up. We're too busy to tell you. This then is one that's completely pilot nav, the PAT 6 out of Boston. As you can see, nowhere on this chart do you see the words radar vectors or expect vectors. From any runway, yeah, no runway heading either. From any runway, it's climb on this heading, intercept that track, go to that point. The only exception in this case would be what? Why? When wouldn't you follow this SID if you were cleared on it? Tower gives you a heading on takeoff. You know, they say fly heading 360, then you fly heading 360. In that case, the departure controller probably knows that the tower controller did that. There's probably a reason. They probably asked him to do that. And that departure controller then is going to instruct you to get back on this route somehow. They will let you know. But if the tower controller has given you a heading when you're on a pilot nav procedure, that heading overrides it. And you kind of have to assume that they know what they're doing there. If you think you've been vectored off into oblivion, sometimes you can jump in and ask. Normally, so the question was, would that be in your clearance as radar vectors 2? Not normally in this case. If they're clearing you on this SID, they're expecting you to fly it off the runway. What may change is by the time you get to the runway, the tower controller might have to give you that heading because something operationally in their airspace has changed, and they need you to avoid whatever traffic they need you to avoid. Air Force One, probably. Oh yeah, if you're a slow guy, oh yeah. Yeah, vectors for get out of my way, right? Exactly. So yeah, you'll get that. But if you're that, you're probably not on this SID.
You might be on the SID, but
It wouldn't, yeah, but it might not be this one. This is a turbojet SID. But generally speaking, if they do that, the departure controller knows that's happening, and they will be responsible for getting you back onto whatever route you were cleared on initially. Moving on. Let's talk about STARS, standard terminal arrivals. And just as we did with SIDS, we're going to start with altitudes. In this case, we're turning along at cruise altitude. We're heading to Houston George Bush, and we're Southwest 123. Descend via the mascot for arrival, 26 left transition, Houston altimeter 2999. So we're going to lower the altitude selector on the mode control panel. It's that number right there. And we're pretending we're good pilots, as I said earlier, so we're going to have this chart in front of us. What's the altitude that we need to select in that mode control panel? Anyone? He said descend via the arrival. Okay. Yeah, well, wouldn't it be nice if you guys had been paying attention when I said it? So yeah, it is indeed, this is a tricky one. Because the lowest altitude on the arrival in this case depends on which runway assignment you got. So it is the lowest published altitude. If you're going to 27, or yeah, if you're going to 26 right, it's Schuyler at 6. If it's 27, it's Prey at 6. I did indeed tell you 26 left, by the way. I just said it like a controller does rapidly. So it does depend on which transition you got. And in this case, 26 left means Zoe at 7,000, so you can't go any lower than 7,000 until the controller clears you down past that point. So going back to that mode control panel, 7,000 is what you want to set that to. Doesn't matter what's on your instrument approach for 26 left. You haven't been cleared to join that yet. So stay at 6 or 7, depending on quick question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if I'm given clearance, or if I'm told to expect 230 at Sandy,
Is that speed? Is that speed restriction?
no, I think that's altitude.
Oh, the altitude, okay.
So if I'm told to expect that, when I get to Sandy, am I allowed to go below that, or do I have to hold at Sandy?
So what you've actually asked is a little bit different than what's on the screen. In this case, you won't get expect flight level 230 at Sammy. You have a hard altitude restriction. Once you're cleared, descend via the arrival. And you see these points that have the bars above and below? That descend via the arrival makes you bound to comply by every single altitude on this chart. So at each point, you need to be where the point lists, and then you can start descending to meet your next restriction or whatever. On other stars, you have a plate where you have expect altitude at a certain point. That's just for planning purposes. You can put that into your FMC to have it calculate an appropriate top of descent point, but you don't actually get that clearance until they say descend to cross blank at blank altitude. So, and they don't say descend to cross, they just say cross blank at blank altitude.
So if I cross Sandy at 230, then I'm still allowed to keep going down.
In this case, yes, because you're descending via the arrival. That was the instruction you're given. Descending via the arrival clears you down the whole list of altitudes. Cross blank at blank altitude generally means cross at blank and maintain that altitude, unless they've told you specifically something different. Lateral compliance on stars. The one big rookie mistake that I do see with lateral compliance on stars is this exact scenario right here. It happens everywhere, but I'm going to use the Banker 3 arrival into Charlotte as an example. The biggest mistake I see newer vets and pilots make is not understanding what they're supposed to do after they pass the last point on the star. So you get to this point, Jordan, okay, up here. Then on track 003, expect radar vectors. What we see pilots do a lot of times. Oh, by the way, how long are you supposed to stay on that 003? As long as it takes, okay? As long as it takes. What happens is that a lot of pilots will see this, either this vector leg. What's the other one that you see? It doesn't say vector, it says what? Route discontinuity, right. There's a tendency in certain tutorials that aren't designed for multiplayer networks will even tell you, put in all these stuff and then just close up all those discontinuities. What you're instructing the FMC to do when you close that discontinuity is to turn directly onto the path of that, where am I at there? Yeah, it's to turn directly onto the path of that approach without being told to. And you hear the perennial the controller will say, Southwest 123, why are you turning toward the airport right now? And they say, oh, I'm sorry, my FMC is messing up. No, the FMC is doing exactly what you told it to do, which was to close up that gap and make that a continuous route. So you don't want to do that. You do want to probably, and there's different schools of thoughts. A lot of times, the conventional wisdom is just leave that discontinuity in there. It's not hurting anything. It's not a master caution. Plane's going to keep flying. So you just want to stay on the course, 003 or whatever's on your particular star, and then don't turn in toward that approach until you've gotten the clearance to do so. When can you close up a discontinuity, by the way? I'll give this as an example. The route that you filed is a star to point A. Your en route segment is point B to point C. And then your SID. SID to point A. Your en route is point B to point C. Your star is then point D to transition into the star. It's certainly appropriate to close up that gap between A and B because that's what you filed and that's what you got cleared on. This star to this point and then this route on, right? That's what I got in my initial clearance, such and such departure, such and such transition, and then as filed, right? But at no point will a delivery controller at Baltimore clear you to join that approach at Boston, okay? So think of it that way. You can only close up that discontinuity if that's what you've been cleared to do. Okay. There's a famous saying, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. You guys have heard that before? Helmuth von Moltke, 1871. In aviation, our version's a little different. First spoken by, well, me. Just now. So, all right, let's close by talking about the big difference between flying solo or flying in an AI-only environment to flying in a multiplayer environment. And we're talking about being adaptable to changing plans. Reroutes happen. Sometimes maybe you filed a turboprop route and you're supposed to be on a jet route, okay? Sometimes you filed a perfectly acceptable, absolutely fine route. But at the airport that you're going to, they've got 350 planes all headed that way, and say it's Denver, man, they got like 20 runways at Denver. They don't need everybody in the same straight line, because that's not going to help them maximize the use of their runways. So they're going to move half of that traffic over to a different route, have Route A come into these two runways, have Route B come into these two runways. Now they can move you all much more quickly. So that reroute might not have anything to do with you filing something bad or good or whatever. Runway assignments. Atlanta is famous for this. I'm parked right by 27 right. Why are they sending me to 26 left for departure? Well, it's because that's the way their airspace works. They want southbound people going off the south side of the airport and northbound people going off the north side of the airport. It doesn't matter where you parked. It's just efficient for not having those planes cross each other like a Blue Angel show pass out on the west side of the field. So you might think you put in the correct runway, now you're given a different runway. So it happens. You've got to be able to be adaptable. Yeah, you got to reprogram that FMC. You got to make sure the right departure points are now on your SID, but you do need to be ready to do that. Mid-air reroutes can happen. Sometimes because of that same flow control into Denver, like I was just saying. Other times, there's a few airports in the US where the SIDs are different if they're landing in a westbound direction versus if they're landing in an eastbound direction. So now, it was perfectly valid when you filed it, but now the wind's going the other way. Now the controller's like, Southwest 123, prepare to copy, be advised ready to copy your reroute instructions. So they're going to re-clear you, and you just need to be ready to do that. You need to know how to operate your FMC so that you can do that. Holds are a big one. Southwest 123 holding instructions, advised ready to copy. And you hear, Senator, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. How do you do a hold? Well, what's the proper way to do a hold?
You follow their instructions and fly roughly an oval track.
Well, yeah. So Yeah, it depends on the FMC. You can enter it into the FMC, and it tells you which way to join, blah, blah, blah. The easy way to do a hold, I swear to God, it's perfectly acceptable on VATSIM. Fly to the hold fix, make a right 180. Fly for a minute, make a right 180, fly back to the hold fix. Keep doing that. Is it perfect? Is it good enough for VATSIM? Yeah.
I don't want to go back to sim controllers. I've never been put in a
Do you fly in events a lot?
I'm sorry.
Do you fly into events a lot?
No.
That's why. Yeah.
Some airports like one airplane can go down the approach at a time. Like Eagle County
Yeah.
in Colorado is like that.
So those of you on the live stream, we're talking about this. There's some airports that you can only clear one person into at a time, so you end up in holds there. But again, if you're just flying to Eagle County on a regular Thursday night, probably one of 3 guys going there, then
If you're the only guy going,
yeah, exactly. You're not going to hold.
him and I went together one time, and he was the first one in, and he made me hold.
Right. Yeah, so 2 planes in rapid succession, somebody's going to get a hold. A lot of times what VATSIM controllers do instead of the hold is they'll break you off of the route and just vector you off into sunset, and then they'll bring you back. Good.
If you have and I don't mean to say this to be funny, but if you have a bathroom emergency and you're virtual airways, can you lie and say emergency, whatever, I gotta land? Or do people ever declare emergency?
It's a great question, not pertinent to this part of the discussion, but I'll come back to it. But anyway, so what do they mean by fly the published hold? Basically just means that whatever hold they just want you to fly is depicted on the chart somewhere. So again, 4th time, 5th time, have the charts up and ready. One common misconception I hear a lot on VATSIM: center, Southwest 123, what runway should I expect at Atlanta? Even better, Memphis Center, Southwest 123, what runway should I expect at Atlanta? They don't know. The approach controllers will handle that, not the center controllers. On VATSIM, I think we get the false impression that center handles everything, because if there's nobody staffed underneath center, guess what? Center handles everything. But realistically speaking, they can tell you we're landing westbound at Atlanta, but they can't tell you specifically what runway you're getting. Normally they can't. I mean, sometimes depending. Like if it's a flow control situation, like I said, this route's getting this runway, this route's getting that runway. But most of the time, center doesn't assign the specific runway. There are some, by the way, this is a great opportunity to tune in that ATIS information we were talking about. Listen to the ATIS recording. It often tells you which runways to expect. But again, sometimes it might be more than one. Which specific one you get is issued on the descent once you're handed from center to approach. That's when you'll be told specifically what runway to expect. Where did I? Oh, and then finally, missed approaches and go-arounds. I've always heard if you're not prepared to fly the missed approach, you're not prepared to fly the approach. I actually heard a better explanation on the VATSIM Discord, and the guy basically said, landing isn't plan A, landing is plan B, okay? You fly that approach down to minimums, and you go around. On the off chance everything is fine, land the plane. Yep. All right, guys. That concludes my scheduled time, and I am still going to come back to your question, sir. This concludes my scheduled time. The 4 p.m. session, it did cancel. How badly did I run over?
Not bad. 30 minutes over.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna be happy to stick around and answer questions for a bit. For those of you who are going to see the P3D one that just started, if you want to rush off to that, that's fine. That's not going to hurt my feelings. But for those of you either on the live stream or if you're here in the room and want to just touch base with me later, lots of ways to get in touch with me. The first one is the VATSIM tutorials playlist on my YouTube channel. By the way, I have somehow amassed over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I don't know how, because I have never once uttered the phrase, "Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe and ring that bell and you'll be notified of new videos." Well, actually, I did just say it just now, but other than that, I've never said it. Somehow 1,000 people have accidentally brushed the subscribe button while they were manipulating their way through YouTube. So, yeah. So, yeah, 1,000 accidental subscribes. Probably the most common way to reach me is the Twitch live stream, Slant Alpha Adventures on twitch.tv. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The stream has a Discord community, and that's probably where I'm most interactive. Oddly enough, I check it every few hours, more or less 24/7, 365. It's a great way to reach me. A lot of times I'm at dinner with my wife when I'm doing that. Or just go old school, send me an email. Old school's the way to go on my channel, by the way. But anyway, no, thank you. And again, I'm going to come back. We're going to close the official session, and I'm going to go take any unofficial questions and answers. But thank you very much for your attention today. Please be healthy and safe in your own travels and adventures, and we'll talk to you soon.